Hey everybody, I'm David with Bolivar Live, and every Friday we talk with Aaron and Franklin, or Aaron and Franklin sponsors Bolivar Live here. And Chandra, thanks for joining us this morning. There's been a lot of talk about Cobra property, and I've had a lot of phone calls. I know Chandra's had a lot of phone calls. We've had some luncheons, and so the next week or 2 to 3 weeks, we're actually going to break down and when I told Chandra I wanted to do these shows, when we got online this morning, she said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know I was going to have this much homework to do." And so I know over the I think it's been 3 weeks now, you've really dug in and got the history, the whys, whens, and hows of Cobra Insurance. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's start off, when it was started and why, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, David. So, like I said, in researching this Cobra, it was started in 1982. The U.S. Congress passed certain actions that would protect, encourage or discourage, I guess, development in coastal barrier areas, natural resources, places that they feel like were vulnerable, I guess, to development. And so they wanted to minimize the effects, and they did that by restricting federal funding and financing assistance in those particular areas. So that started in 1982, and all this is managed by the Department of the Interior under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they're the ones that kind of regulate it, but it's under the Department of the Interior. So they do put out maps every 5 years. The maps are subject to a comment period by state and local officials that can comment on these particular areas. So every 5 years they want to get FEMA to update the maps and re-put them, republish them so that we can see exactly what are the new Cobra zones, if they've changed at all. And so that's where we can maybe make an impact, because we can actually advocate with our state and local representatives and say, hey, we want to have some changes to these Cobra zones. It's too restrictive for growth. One of the things that we've seen is that the Texas legislature put into place in 2003 some restrictions also on these Cobra zones. And basically, their restrictions say that you cannot build anything other than residential structures. So you cannot build a condo, an apartment, a duplex, or other multifamily or hotel or resort in the coastal zone. So that's anything that was platted. So there's a difference between built and platted. Platted is when the subdivision was basically platted with the surveyor and filed with the county. So anything after 2003, June 11th, 2003, that was platted or replatted, you can't replat something that's already platted. If it was replatted or platted after June 11th, 2003, you can't put anything on there other than a residential structure. And that's kind of contradictory to what we're seeing, because I've seen some areas since June 2003 that were platted after that time that have been developed down in Bolivar. So I don't know how they're doing that, but it's not that you can't get a permit. It's not that you can't build a structure. It's not that you can't get a WPI 8. It's just that there's no federal money that's going to support you. So you're not going to get any infrastructure. You're not going to get any NFIP flood insurance. And you're definitely not going to get TWIA wind insurance. It's just not going to happen, because even though you can get that WPI 8, that their underwriting guidelines prohibit giving you insurance in a Cobra zone. So that's just part of the underwriting requirements. So it looks like everything's moving along like it should, and then you get to the point of needing insurance, and then you're at a stop sign.
And that's where independent insurance companies come in.
Correct.
You know?
Correct. Yeah. And those things are really expensive. The independent agencies like Lloyd's and some of the others, I mean, they will write a limited amount in a Cobra zone, but the premium is really high. And so we were also looking at, okay, well, what if we go and do build to a fortified criteria? That's an enhanced fortified criteria. They still will not write. So there's a lot of the people that will write fortified in all the other zones, a block up the street that's not in a Cobra zone, but they won't write it there. And it's really strange. The way that Bolivar is broken up, and there's some maps, and I'll send you the link to the maps. You can see the entire peninsula, and you see these little stripes of Cobra zone. Some of it is areas where we've had wetlands, some of it's not. And it's
Hmm.
really strange how they've divided it up. And I have no idea what their criteria is as far as what they consider vulnerable or otherwise protected area versus not, because the whole peninsula is basically a big nature preserve. I mean, we have so many animals, grasses, unique uh,
Wetlands.
wetlands and stuff that we have birds, we have all kinds of things that we need to protect. And we do need to be conscientious, I think, about our development and be smart about it. But on the flip side, like, we can't prohibit growth either. We can't. I mean, I think the reason it hasn't really become an issue until now is that, so we had 2003 and everything that was platted prior to 2003. Well, we had Rita come in 2000, what, 6, and then Ike in 2008. So all we
Hmm.
were doing was rebuilding. We weren't building new stuff, really. We were rebuilding on the
Right.
existing areas. So now that we've kind of rebuilt and gotten most of the peninsula back after Ike, well, now we're ready to
Expanding.
expand and grow, and we can't really do that with these limitations in place. So I think that we have a lot. I have a lot of clients, and I know some others that have clients that are trying to do these development projects for new subdivisions in Bolivar, and we're just hitting a lot of roadblocks. It's like they'll let us do it, but we're worried that we're going to develop this great subdivision, spend a lot of money, put a lot of infrastructure in place because we're not getting any federal help, we're not getting any county help. We're putting all that in place ourselves, and then we're ready to sell lots, and nobody can get a loan because you can't get insurance. So it's a
Well,
huge
and
problem.
yeah, and talking to Dan, and like I said earlier, we need to get him in maybe on the third show to talk about the insurance on it and what may lighten up, and what they're seeing on the insurance part. The funny thing
Yeah.
is, though, real quick, they said you can't, and I'm gonna throw this out there because I'm
Hmm.
always like to break the bank. They say you can't spend any federal money on it,
That's correct.
but I can tell you for a fact when Ike hit and FEMA came in and the cleanup crew came in, they cleaned up and spent federal money on Cobra property. Now, if you can't spend federal money on Cobra property, how can they spend federal money on cleanup? And so
Right. So
that's one.
maybe on the cleanup they would, just because it would help to bring that natural protected area back to its prior state.
But
So maybe that's the reason.
it doesn't say that in there. It
It
says
doesn't.
federal money spent, and I know when they were talking
Yeah.
about the sewer coming through in Crystal Beach, it could only go from like Stingery Road or somewhere up there through like
Yep.
Crystal Beach Drive or Monkhouse because it couldn't cross
That's right.
Cobra property, and
That's right.
anything outside of the old Crystal Beach, uh, city of Crystal Beach was Cobra property. And
That's
so,
right.
but you also said the maps were done every 5 years,
That's
and there's
right.
a comment period. So it sounds like
Yeah.
we're
And what's
out of.
funny is they just ended the comment period in December last year. So
Well,
so
and it
we're going to be kind of stuck with the maps that we
for
have for
5 years,
the next 5 years. Yeah. But the
but
good news is we know we can prepare for it, and we can start putting those things in place to talk to our legislators and have them advocate for us when the next comment period comes up, that we can
right,
say, hey, we don't agree with these maps. We really want these maps to reflect a different uh, distribution of where the Cobra zones are. We would like less restrictions here. If you want to, shift it and have more restrictions there. I mean, there's a lot of areas in Bolivar that are still undeveloped, and
Right.
and and we don't want to develop them, and we
And
do want those natural areas to be protected. But there's a lot of areas that it's like it's really a divot in the sand. I mean, it's not
what
really a wetland, and we don't need to, if it's not tidally affected, and that's kind of the distinction that the Corps of Engineer uses. It's like the way they determine a wetland. If it's got tidal effects,
right.
they consider it a wetland, and if it doesn't, then it's just considered a depression, and we don't really have to consider it as a wetland, but they have to kind of exclude it.
They have to do
So
that expensive study on it by an
yes,
engineering firm to,
yes.
to
And
come
we
out.
don't do that. We don't do those, but I mean, we do
Right.
know people that do.
Yeah,
But
environmental.
the environmental impact
Well,
studies. So yeah,
well, it sounds like, and that's what actually started this a month and a half ago, was new development coming in and insurance. And so, like I said, we're going to break this down into several shows so that we can let you know what's going on. And this is the basis of it now.
right. And
Um,
I've got all the resources that I found, and so I'm gonna send you all the links to that so that you
okay.
can share those that information so that people don't have to do the same research that I did. But it's really good because all this started in '82, and then Texas kind of you know legislatively got on board in 2003, and so that's when they really put the restrictions in place saying, okay, if it's not platted before 2003 in a Cobra zone, we're not gonna insure it,
But it
and we're
can
not
be,
gonna allow. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
can it be Cobra Zone if it was plotted before 2003?
This game
Can you
is.
get TWIA and insurance and all that
Yes,
insurance in? Okay.
yes, you can.
So anything
Even
platted,
if the house wasn't built, or if the house was rebuilt after 2003, if the subdivision was
was
platted
platted before
prior to
2003.
2003. And Biscayne was. So Biscayne is kind of it's definitely in the Cobra zone. And we all our paperwork for TDI, we mark that it's in the Cobra zone. So so they know, but they can look at the plat date because the appraisal district does have the plat date on the um, information online. And you can see, okay, the plat date for that subdivision was X, and then it was prior to that time frame, and so we can insure it or we cannot insure it.
Right.
So that's kind of how they distinguish between. But like
It's the plat
Biscayne
date.
was platted before, which is good. And say you built a house right when it was, brand new subdivision, that's fine. You can continue to have your TWIA insurance, and then later on down the line, if
So
you
if you
tear it down, build a new one, you can still have insurance
so
on
if
it.
I bought a lot in there now and built a house, you can get TWIA insurance and all that.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Because of the plat date. Yes, sir.
Okay. 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 Well, Chandra, thanks for joining us today. We're going to cut this one off so we don't go too long.
That's good.
But we're going to do some more shows on this actually next week. We're going to do another show. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for all the work, because I know you've put a lot of time into it. I could tell it by your eyes when you said, "My gosh, you didn't tell me how much back to work homework I was going to have to do." But we'll be back next week with more information and a follow up on Cobra insurance or Cobra zones, the who's, how's, when's, why's, and what's of the Cobra zones. Until next time, I'm David with Bolivar Live. Y'all have a great day, great week. Come see us. God bless, and bye bye.